What year was that?
Gosh, I was 7. So we're going to say 1960s,
Okay.
62.
I'm going to come back to why I asked you what year that was. Okay. So you were a young child and you were enamored with this giant figure. I mean, he was an imposing figure.
Right.
But you're from Illinois.
Right.
Chicago?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, growing up in Chicago public schools, which I did, I mean, he was larger than George Washington. He was, we were taught he was the emancipator of the slaves and all returned to that Union as well. And that he fought a war to keep the Union whole, and he was all kinds of great things. And again, you had a sense that government could do good.
Exactly.
Figure that,
Yes.
And that probably the spirit of the times was a lot different. Kennedy was president, or was this after
Yes,
Kennedy?
and I think the assassination had happened.
Okay, but it was still the idea of sacrificing for government. That's not what your government can do for you, but what you can do for your government. It was the idea that government could do good. It was somewhat it wasn't technically pre-Vietnam, but in our minds it's pre-Vietnam.
Yes.
Okay. Who else is early more of this?
I remember walking with my mother, this would be the mid-50s, for the March of Dimes, going door to door.
And again, a notion of community. There's a community out beyond you that is in need, that there are diseases out there, and that you had to help remedy that problem. Having a social commitment, and I'll get back to that too. Who can I pick on? What are your first memories? I think you're probably younger.
One of my memories, I think, would have to be when I was maybe 7 or 8, and my family was talking about the government. They talked bad about this person is mad, and I kept believing to myself like, this person must be real mean. You don't want to bump into him. And then I never comprehended government until later on. Oh, the government, I know who it is. But for me growing up, I thought the government was this mean person.
So let me tell you the difference. And this is the reason I asked you when you were. There have actually been studies on this. You are something that's called post-Watergate. We are pre-Watergate. And there have actually been studies of high school textbooks, pre-Watergate textbooks versus post-Watergate. Pre-Watergate was Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator. Franklin Roosevelt, who pulled us out of the New Deal, who pulled us out of the Great Depression. George Washington, the father of our country. Watergate did great damage to the political culture of our society. He thought it was some guy, he didn't know Mr. Government out there. And so again, our sensibilities, the way we look at the world is very different. I still look at government as something that can do good things. More often than not, I disagree with what our government's doing. There's that potential. Teaching from the 70s to now, I really have a sense of this because I ask my students their first memories, and today students almost invariably have no memory prior to Watergate. So it's like all the idealism, the pre-Watergate era, is dead, and it's kind of a frightening thing. I think, and this is not a political spiel, but I do think the Obama election set into motion
A resurgence of that.
Yes, a resurgence of that.
Absolutely.
And a big difference is I worked in the 1968 presidential campaign. I was at the Democratic convention. I was tear gassed with my father, and nothing bonds you with your father like being tear gassed. But there was a sense of defeat and hopelessness in '68. After 2008, just the opposite. Even with all that has happened, with the attacks on Obama, even today, the New York Times, they had an article on the birthers, and they actually, or was it the Tribune? One of those two papers, I get both, had his birth certificate and everything, And they interviewed, they had a clip, they talked about a clip from the Hawaiian newspaper, whatever, showing that he was the birth announcement, so he was native born. But even despite all these attacks on Obama, there still is a sense of hope. So again, a lens paradigm. This exercise is a good icebreaker because you get to know people. You have to think on your feet because you have to connect what everybody says with each other. But it begins to get the students to realize we aren't all alike. We all have different memories. And if we all echo the same idea, it'd be a very boring, bland exercise. But the fact that there's diversity in the classroom you begin to see that, hey, wait a second, they're from a slightly different perspective than I am. So the lens paradigm is a very good exercise. It develops critical thinking because it makes students realize there isn't one certain reality. That we all look at the world through different paradigms. Why is one paradigm more legitimate than another? Let's analyze it. Don't take it for granted. We often take it for granted based on where we stand. But when you do this lens paradigm exercise, it forces you to step outside of the way you think and realize, hey, wait a second, there are alternative explanations, alternative ideas out there. Number 2, personal inventories. Now this is actually an exercise that I picked up from my participation in the Title V grant. A few years ago, 4 years ago, we had a day-long workshop. And one of the exercises they had us do is we had to do a personal inventory. What are the 5 most important things in your life? And it was amazing, the differences we all came up with. At first, we mixed them up and we read them aloud and you had to figure out whose personal inventory is who. It was a very good exercise. I use it in a modified way in my classes. But one, again, it's an icebreaker. It gets you to know the other. And what's interesting about it is the discussion afterwards. You realize, hey, wait a second. We might have different backgrounds. But there are a lot of common things, too. I grew up on the southeast side of Chicago. This was amazing. We had, at the time, I think, 10 faculty who were part of the Title V, who were at this workshop. Of the 10 faculty, 3 of us grew up. I was the only one who went to Bowen High School, and we all lived in Bowen District. The other 2 went to private schools. Bowen is 2710 East 89. Phenomenal memory, right? It was in all of our books, 2710 East 89, and I lost quite a few of them, so I was committed to my memory. One of us was Jewish, one of us was African American, and one of us was Latino. Again, the southeast side of Chicago was a wonderful polyglot place with a very diverse population. It's fallen on very hard times. If any of you know the southeast side of Chicago, it was literally a lot of kids' parents worked in steel mills. But this personal inventory that we shared with each other made us realize, hey, wait a second, there were So one woman in the group said she was really tied to her Baptist church, and the other said she was very tied to her Catholic church. There was a lot of common denominators. One was African American, one was Latina, but nevertheless, church was the center of their lives. So these personal inventories, again, make you realize, hey, wait a second, there's a lot that connects us. There was one woman in the class, in the group, whose father was a professional violinist. She was from Louisiana. She was African American. You never would have guessed it. But I think she was from Louisiana. But again, things like that just pop up. Where you realize you have connections with people that you may not have originally had. So the personal inventories, you jot down 3 or 5. I limited it to 3 for time reason. The 5 most important things that define you, whether it be personal experiences or people or memberships or what have you. I should be quick. So it's personal inventories. The third one is I'll do this very fast. Are reflective diaries. And these are very interesting things. You have a common read in a class. Every year for our University Honors Seminar, we have a common read. This year we read The Tipping Point, phenomenal book. Go out and read it. And he looks at, actually the author looks at how we are all defined by our environment. But you have the students write diaries, think pieces.